This tutorial, called Attributes in Action, Key Competencies of UWI Graduates, will provide you an introduction to the competency-based education framework for the open campus. Hopefully, this short video will provide you the essentials for understanding this framework and how it is conceptualized to be implemented within the curriculum at the open campus. The strategic plan for the university has outlined 7 qualities all graduates should be able to demonstrate at the end of their curriculum. Developing these qualities enables all graduates to take on positive roles in society and strengthens the region's intellectual and social capacities to explore new horizons in the interest of Caribbean development. In addition, the postgraduate student would be expected to lead organizations and teams, set effective goals, and develop and apply sustainable outcomes for the overall benefit of the external community, as well as have the ability to make significant and continuing contributions of new knowledge to research in his or her discipline. The next several slides review the definitions of the attributes as described in the strategic plan. It is recommended that you pause the video at each slide to read these descriptions and become familiar with them. These attributes encompass academic abilities, skills, and other personal and professional qualities that students acquire during their learning experiences at the university. The facilitator plays a vital role in helping students acquire these qualities through the design of course activities that develop competencies which characterize the desired attributes. The competency domains identified are drawn from globally defined knowledge, skills, and attitudes, often referred to as KSAs, and reflected in course objectives and outcomes. Competencies are generally defined by stated expectations for the attributes of graduates and their abilities after completion of a program or series of courses. The competencies are linked directly to the key attributes of a UWI graduate and are used to identify explicit learning outcomes associated with completion of a program. In this way, the competency domains interdependently support the goals of the university through their linkage to the attributes and program outcomes. This interdependency can be seen in this chart displaying how multiple competencies can be associated with the development of one or more attributes. Pause the video for a moment and examine this chart so you can see these interrelationships. This chart identifies the 22 competencies that have been mapped to the desired attributes of our graduates. Pause the video for a moment and identify which competencies you believe are addressed in the courses you teach. Then ask yourself, how would you translate them into course activities? By utilizing consistent definitions of the competency domains, all members of the UWI organization work with a common understanding of the institution's cumulative goals for the graduate. Each competency domain is considered at the program level and addressed within the curricula through identification of subcompetencies which relate to learning objectives within the courses. The competencies are integrated within the curricula structure through incorporation of the subcompetencies via the learning objectives. The learning objectives guide the selection of course activities and assessment tools. In order to produce graduates with the stated attributes, each program must address all competency domains. However, individual courses may only address a subset of competencies as applicable to the discipline or course level. This is accomplished through the identification of applicable subcompetencies that are reflected in the learning objectives of a course. This diagram depicts the framework utilized in integrating competencies within the curricular structure. As can be seen, competency domains originate from the attributes or expectations of a program. Within the context of a course, certain subcompetencies for a given domain are identified as applicable and help shape the learning objectives. These learning objectives are used to determine which course activities will best achieve the instructional or behavioral objectives within the course or unit. The proficiency levels exhibited by students when completing these activities are measured during the assessment process using rubrics aligned with expectations of performance and mastery. The assessment then results in a grading of the student's performance based on qualitative and quantitative criteria identified in the rubric. Subcompetencies define broadly what learners can do and should know within the context of a specific course. Subcompetencies may differ due to discipline or degree level, where increased mastery is expected based on course level. For example, year 1 versus year 2, or expectation of existing foundational skills or knowledge upon entry to the program, as is the case with graduate programs of study. For example, in the case of competency domain problem solving, in a Level 1 course, a student may only be expected to define problems or set goals, but in a Level 2 course, that same student may need to show an ability to propose or evaluate potential solutions. The level of proficiency a student must achieve with respect to satisfying requirements of an objective is dependent on a number of factors, including course level, the complexity of task and information, levels of prior knowledge consistent with grade level, and mental processes used. The acceptable performance level should be indicated in the learning objective using clearly descriptive words, often drawn from Bloom's taxonomy. Typically, rubrics for assessment of proficiency levels will be drawn from Webb's depth of knowledge model, which consists of 4 levels of performance. Webb's depth of knowledge is a model used in analyzing the cognitive expectation demanded by standards, curricular activities, and assessment tasks. Represented by 4 levels of proficiency, each level reflects the cognitive depth or knowledge required to complete a task. The model was designed to broadly encompass all forms of knowledge and reflects increasing levels of complexity of mental processes rather than difficulty of task. As a result, assessment of a student will incorporate not only the achievement of learning objectives based on its central verb, but also consider the complexity of the task or information, conventional levels of prior knowledge based on the student's grade level, and the mental processes used to satisfy the requirements of the objective. Pause the video for a moment to familiarize yourself with the 4 levels established in Webb's depth of knowledge model. An established approach to assessing proficiency is through the use of rubrics developed under the Association of American Colleges and Universities LEAP initiative. These rubrics utilize Webb's depth of knowledge levels to assess the achievement of students in 16 key learning outcomes commonly incorporated into undergraduate education. These rubrics identify sub-competency performance levels for each of the 16 learning outcomes. The LEAP rubrics served as a foundation in creating the rubrics suggested for the CBE framework at UWI. The sub-competencies identified for each learning outcome or competency domain use a 4-level criteria for performance similar to most rubrics used for grading. However, most competency-related rubrics will use qualitative observations in the assessment as opposed to purely quantitative criteria. This may make the assessment process more time-consuming, but helps the facilitator generate more informed feedback to the student with respect to improvement. The table at the right shows an example of how a sub-competency rubric provides this type of information. Pause the video for a moment to examine the differences with respect to this example of a sub-competency rubric with those normally used in your courses. Using qualitative assessment based on these rubrics is no different than applying any other set of rubrics to the evaluation of a student's assignments or participation. Once a determination of what level of performance is expected to be achieved within a certain course for a particular subcompetency, the rubric can be used to determine the weightings of marks associated with that particular criteria. Not all courses need to require Level 4 achievement on all subcompetencies. Translating the performance levels into grades must be determined from a qualitative perspective first, using the GPA grade descriptors to determine whether the expected level of performance is that of a satisfactory level or acceptable level. Once this is determined, the weightings for assignments of marks can be applied in a similar fashion as they are applied to current rubrics in use. So, for example, if Level 2 achievement was the expected level of proficiency for a particular subcompetency in a course, using the GPA standards, Level 2 might be aligned with satisfactory to good weightings, which represent B and B- grades, or 60 to 69% of marks. Then, to recognize added achievement or proficiency of students who perform at higher levels, the marks for Level 3 might be aligned to reflect B+ and A- grades, in other words, 70 to 79% of marks, and similarly, Level 4 to reflect outstanding and exceptional performance, normally assigned to A and A+ students, or 80 to 100%. Level 1, then, would encompass any below expectation performance and will allow the student performance to be evaluated from a range of fair to poor, or 0 to 59%, reflecting grades from C+ through F. Pause the video to examine this example of how the rubric for this subcompetency can generate more authentic assessment of a student's performance. This concludes the tutorial on the CBE framework. Reflect on how you might implement it within your course or program. It provides a means to combine knowledge with experience through course activities that will allow students to reach beyond their boundaries and achieve more than we can imagine.